You learn things when the world softens around a wound. You learn to measure time by the small conveniences you no longer have. For me, it began on the morning Lena didn't come home. We had a life that looked ordinary from the outside. 2 bedrooms in a pre-war building on the east side. Coffee at 8 on weekdays. She left for work. I would come home and find the apartment leaning gently toward her, a mug she favored in the sink, a sweater on the back of a chair. Small proofs that someone is there, that someone is alive because they are expected. That morning, the sweater stayed on the chair. The mug collected dust. I waited until dark and then called her number until the voicemail cut in with that polite, distant voice machines have. The police told me they'd send someone, that people go missing, and sometimes it's nothing at all. Their kindness was procedural. I felt nothing in it but friction. When they opened her apartment on the second week, because you learn that sleeplessness invites perspective and you begin to notice patterns, it was not the scene of a random robbery. There were signs someone wanted to make a statement. A lamp knocked over, a window cracked from the inside. The paramedics said trauma. The detective said blunt words, theft gone wrong. The city press found a neat headline and a photo of my face with my grief flattened into a stock expression. People are terrible at seeing what they don't want to see. They are better at filling the blanks with comforting words. Break in, they said. No leads. Tragic. I went home and pinned her photograph to the kitchen wall and swore I would find out what they had decided to ignore. That was the morning I stopped believing in the city's stories and decided to write my own. Before Lena, I was a detective with a precinct on the Lower East Side. I left the force 2 years before we met. I told myself I wanted quiet. The truth is, quieter things had felt like survival. After she died, I missed the work more than I expected. Not chasing shadows for the thrill, but the feel of patterns assembling under your hands. I started small. I called old contacts. I visited men who had been cooperative and those who use people for a living. There's an economy to information in this city. Names have weight, and weight can buy a fact. I learned to move gently through rooms where men kept secrets like coins. The first thing I did was ask the 3 police questions we all learn as kids. Who benefits? Who had motive? Who had opportunity? It is ugly work to enumerate those things when the first item on your list is the person you loved. But you do it anyway, and you let the inventory be clinical. It keeps the grief from making you brittle in ways that wreck plans. At first, none of it added up. Lena was an art director at a boutique agency. She made tasteful funding decks and knew a way to make bad coffee taste like ritual. She had no enemies I could see. No gambling debts. No late-night arguments. She loved small bookstores, older jazz records, and the way rain decorated New York windows. And yet in the records I pulled, credit card receipts, tiny transfers, there were notes, clues, the kind of accounting people keep when they want to remember things for themselves. One small transfer to a name I didn't recognize. A reservation at a hotel that never showed up on her calendar. When people lie, they always leave an impression. Even the cleanest lies wear a seam. The first name I turned over felt absurdly large, Victor Kane. His portrait was familiar, in charity photos, at ribbon cuttings, smiling into pewter cameras. He had a foundation, the right friends, and the sort of reputation that builds staircases to power. Men like him do not make enemies they cannot buy off or bury. That's what they think, and that is how they defend themselves. I thought it laughable at first. What did Victor Kane, investor and patron of the arts, have to do with Lena? Then I found the ledger. Not a physical gargantuan ledger. Those are dramatic and rare. No, I found an email chain, a string of conversations between an agency that booked art direction and a private events firm. In the chain, Lena's name appeared as a contact. Nothing incriminating in itself. But behind one of those messages was a note. Room held, guest on call. And on the receipt, a large transfer to an account at a bank I had to drive to the other side of the river to find, a bank that calls itself private to make itself invisible. The pattern looked deliberate the way a printed circuit board looks deliberate. Lines and contacts arranged precisely for a purpose. And once you see the board, you start to notice how the electricity flows. I called a man who used to work Kane's charities. He spoke in a careful voice. They hire people to make them look palatable, he said. They buy art to cover the smell of other things. People take payment and consider it charity. They buy silence the way other men buy suits. It's a soft kind of brutality hidden in normality. That's the point of it. It didn't prove anything. Names do not prove murder. But names get you doors. If you decide to break a system, first you must learn its seams. I slept in rented rooms under names that were not mine. I used phones that were purchased with cash. I ate at diners at 3 in the morning because the waitstaff speaks to you less and you can hear their rhythm. If they're careful with their eyes, they're hiding fear. If they do not ask questions, they're either loyal or terrified. I watched Lena's schedule in the months before she died. Meetings with clients labeled as private. A series of dinners at a club downtown paid with a corporate credit card. A pattern of late nights that suggested someone was arranging things outside of her ordinary life. She had been a door, and some men had walked through with purpose. I also watched Victor Kane. He was the kind of man who collects causes and then uses them to sharpen his image. He would be photographed holding a check, chatting with 3 councilmen, smiling into the camera like a man who had practiced generosity. Power in New York is not always brutality. Sometimes it's an unassuming kindness that makes you forget to look deeper. I learned their rhythm. I slotted into the pattern like a gear. I used an old detective's trick. Listen to the quiet. People make their loudest mistakes when they try to hide their small ones. A wrong name on a ledger, a duplicate receipt, a line of text that says guest, discretion. The city is built of honed indifference and tiny oversights. Those oversights are how you reconstruct truth. The breakthrough came in the least cinematic of places, a storage locker 2 boroughs out, paid in cash, the kind of place you keep when you have both money and shame. Men who are careful still trust in locks. They think money buys better locks. Sometimes it does. Often it buys men who forget to check the back of the ledger. There are boxes, binders, a small ledger of names that made my throat hollow, locations, dates, and small notations that read like a shopping list. A Polaroid slipped between 2 manila folders showed Lena not smiling. A rare thing. The face of someone who knows they're being used. A hand at her shoulder belonged not to Kane, but to a man called Ortega, a name with old money and old, sharp friends. Ortega's clients were not the kind who made headlines. They were men who funded favors and took care of needs that never reached courtrooms. You want to understand how a city moves silently? Start there. Start with names arranged like a code. Once you have the names, you can map the little railings that connect them. You follow money, you follow rooms, and eventually you find faces you didn't expect to find in the photographs of civic good. I left the locker and did not sleep for 30 hours. It's a poor form to make life decisions from adrenaline, but there's a kind of clarity in fatigue. You see things as lines rather than clouds. I began to move men as if chess pieces, not out of amusement, but because chess taught me how to think 3 moves ahead. You want institutions to act? You give them headlines. You feed paper the right photograph, and names go from being whispered to being public. That is how leverage works. My plan was simple. Expose the paper trail until the men could not buy their way back into respectability. I worked slowly. A leaked invoice there. A call to a journalist who still believed in the power of a story. Documents to a watchdog NGO. Evidence does not convince in isolation. It persuades when it makes the comfortable uneasy. It persuades when donors start asking questions and when board members find the wrong names beside the wrong donations. When the first article hit the web, there was a delicious hush inside a room I had never been in. A room where men who have always been protected wondered whether anyone reliable remained who loved them enough to keep paying. Victor Kane changed his speech that week. He smiled a smile that had been rehearsed to handle critique. He told the cameras about his philanthropy and how unfounded attacks were sad in a city that needed generosity. Those speeches are a shield. They will not hold forever if the people behind them have feet of clay. Mine were not the only leaks. A hacker I had paid to be inconvenient sent me a file that made a board member uneasy. The board member called, then resigned. The press filed follow-ups. A hearing was scheduled that no one expected. You need allies for this kind of work. People who write, people who listen, people who get tired of the city's polite lies. I found them. We made a small community of the honest and the desperate. We worked tired and quietly. Every small expose fed the larger engine we had built. The little names became a list, and lists organized power. It is easy to underestimate how quickly power unravels once the thread is pulled. It is also easy to forget what you become in the process. I had started this to make the city remember the name of the man who had used my life as a lesson. In the doing, I learned that men with money have ways to retaliate that are ugly, legal, and private. They hit back with everything they had. Contracts vanished. Bank accounts were closed under whistleblower claims. People who had been warm to me suddenly remembered how inconvenient my presence was. The press that once asked for more details now moved on to lighter headlines. Power reasserts itself. It hires people whose job is to make noise until the outrage dilutes. Then came the night Claire never forgot. The night we realized we had exposed something both brittle and dangerous. It was supposed to be a meeting at an office, an arrangement to hand more documents to a journalist in exchange for a guarantee of publication. It turned into a raid. Men in suits, lawyers, and cameras tiptoed through the corridor of a building that smelled like coffee and expensive toner. They took things back and left an impression I knew well. The scent of someone who has been taught not to speak. That week they retaliated personally. A friend's shop closed overnight. A donor recanted. My name was slurred in thin columns with breathless disclaimers that implied I acted alone and with malice. The city was returning the favor. It was making me inconvenient. There is a calm panic you see in men when the walls they built start to shake. They look at you not as a person who acted, but as an instrument of a narrative they did not anticipate. They start to buy silence harder. They start to put out calls to men with reputations of their own. I could feel them calculating how much of their lives it would cost them to silence me. And then the choice came. You can make a plan that ends at humiliation and civil failure. Papers, resignations, the empty ritual of appearing to be chastened. Or you can push further. The law will not always do what your moral logic demands. The legal system asks for proof of intent and chain of custody and all the things that make prosecution slow and often unsatisfying. You can wait for the law, or you can make the law necessary by making the facts undeniable. I chose to make the facts undeniable. I decided we would follow the money far enough to force a federal inquiry. We would sink probes into accounts until there was nothing left to hide. You cannot rely on the city's appetite for truth. You have to create a hunger for it. It meant taking dangerous steps. It meant forging alliances with prosecutors who were still idealists. It meant telling Claire that our lives would not be ordinary again. She did not flinch. That should have been a comfort. Instead, it felt like a confirmation of how far things had already gone. People change when their life is stripped. Claire was no exception. She becomes careful. She learns to be an instrument of survival. That is not weakness. It's a kind of intelligence honed under pressure. We moved funds, we set traps, we collected metadata. The kind of work that would make the press yawn and detectives excited. We built a file that could not be laughed away in committee rooms. It was exhaustive, cold, clinical. Revenge often needs that. It needs the sterility of evidence to look like anything but a vendetta. The public inquiry arrived like a storm. Subpoenas, hearings, a long line of men called to testify who had rehearsed their responses for photo ops. It was ugly and human and oddly cleansing. The press leaned in. Public opinion shifted slowly, then fast. Victor Kane's board meetings leaked details that made people uncomfortable in a way a speech cannot wash away. Ortega's name appeared in pages that once read like invites. Men who had thought themselves immune began to feel the clamp of consequences. You don't topple an empire without breaking the ground around it. At the hearing, Victor read from a prepared apology that looked like contrition but felt hollow. I sat in the back of the room and listened to the cadence of someone who believed his own words. A camera found my face and pulled it close, and for a moment I remembered why I started. It was not for vengeance as theater. It was because the city needed to remember itself. They made deals. There were guilty pleas, fines, partial admissions. The law is not a machine that restores everything. It is a blunt thing, but it is something. Claire and I watched it unfold, street by street of revelations, the city looking like a man who has had his face washed slowly clean. And then, after the begots of hearings and the slow grind of legal notes, they came for the final evidence, a secured server linked to a trust account. The government froze funds. Men who had been used to fluidity found their cash immobile. The pressure was not poetic exactly. It was procedural, relentless. And in that relentlessness, I saw the small wins become a shape I could recognize. We thought it would end, but endings in life are long things. The small triumph of a frozen account does not immediately warm a cold bed. The men we fought had reach. They could still find ways to breathe. They still had people and places that matter. What happened next was quieter than I expected. It was not the cinematic collapse, nor the divine ruin I had once imagined when the grief first began to harden inside me. It was a series of small admissions, some resignations, a book deal here and there, and a man named Ortega who moved abroad to a country that refused extradition. Not every part of the machine broke, but had shifted. Claire started a small nonprofit. She worked with women whose names are not famous, but whose lives matter in the long arc. She stood up in community rooms and taught women how to catalog abuse and how to contact people who might help. It was slow, and it was the kind of work that will not get a headline, but it would save someone's life in a way that power never could. I returned to a life that looked like a life only in the way clothes can look proper on a hanger. I went back to walking the same streets. I ate at the same diner, and sometimes I would sit and watch mornings in a small, ordinary way because proof of ordinary living feels fragile and you learn to hold it close. There was a moment, many months later, when I visited the precinct where I had once worked. Detective Hargreaves, the woman who had helped me in the margins and who had scolded me like a father and a prosecutor, looked me in the eye. "You got them to remember," she said. "That isn't nothing." She was right. It mattered. I came to understand that revenge can open a door but cannot make an entire house live again. It can force people to look. It can adjust the ledger. It cannot repair all the things that were stolen. The truth is both brittle and enormous. It will not always make you whole, but it can make a path for other people to walk through, and sometimes that is enough to measure the cost. The city remembers in ways that are small. A councilman loses a committee seat. A charity is audited. A man cannot walk into the chambers he once filled. These are public things that matter. But Lena's laugh, the small way she tilted her head when she listened to a record she loved, those things are gone in a way the public does not account for. So I did something both small and important. I taught a handful of volunteers and a legal aid team how to find ledgers and how to read bank statements. I shared what I had learned about patterns and names and the way men hide payments behind the noble language. We built a resource that would not make headlines, but that would, slowly, make the city less hospitable to those who treat human lives like currency. One summer evening, Claire and I walked on the Brooklyn Bridge. The lights leaned into the river like a promise that was difficult to argue with. She held my hand in a way that made me remember the reasons for the work. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. "You didn't." I did not answer her because there was no honest answer. I had not done it all for her or for justice alone. I had done it because once you learn how to look at an injustice and you can see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. In the end, what feels like redemption is not a trophy. It is a decision. It is the choice to use what was broken to build something small and useful. It is accepting that the ledger will remain unbalanced, but choosing to help others be accounted for. If you ask me whether revenge made anything better, I will answer in the only way I can. Some things were fixed. Some men were held to account. Some small rooms now have lights where there once were none. Lena's death did not vanish. It will always be there, but it does not have the same monopoly on my life. I keep her photograph in a drawer I open every morning. I talk to people who have been hurt. I teach. I listen. That is my work now. The city keeps its ledger, and so do I, but I use it differently. This is the story of what I did, why I did it, and how the city that forgets is sometimes made to remember in small and stubborn ways. If there is redemption in it, it is this, truth told, a life reassembled into something that does not end at the moment of grief. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm not a hero. I'm not a saint. I learned to read receipts and names and to be patient to a fault. I made mistakes. I caused harm. I also made things visible that had been kept invisible for too long. If you listen to this and you choose to do something, get involved, be present, teach someone how to read their own ledgers, then the cost may mean more than it did to me. I say this with both honesty and exhaustion. In a city that buys its silence,